too, and it is a very warm one today, over 30 degrees. Um, but very warm welcome to you today, joining us for a very special VAT chat on the subject of failure and how to fail better. I'm joined today by Mark Roberts, who is a writer, director of research, and English teacher who's here to help us understand failure a bit better and how we can support our colleagues and move on from failures as well. Something which I think is very prevalent within the professional exam environment, but maybe something we don't talk about so much. So, Mark, a very warm welcome to you as well. Hope you're keeping cool.
Thank you. Yes, it's warm here as well. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you about this really important topic. And you said that it's a topic that people avoid talking about, and it is something that's really painful for many people. And when they think about the failures and the prospect of failure, it's something that can leave really quite deep psychological scars, and that can impact on our career goals, the way that we approach certain challenges, how we view them in life, and things that we might see as small things from the outside can really leave a lasting sting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to digging into failure and how this might apply with the people that you're working with in terms of professional exams.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I think we've mentioned the F word quite a few times already.
Mhm.
And I know in your book you talk about sort of different types of failure, if that's the right way to say it. So I don't know if it's worth starting there in terms of, I might think of I have failed a particular
Mhm.
paper on a qualification,
Mhm.
but is that the only way that we might experience failure?
No, absolutely not. So failure, from an academic point of view, is really seen as when an individual falls short of their own goal that they've set. And that bit's really important, that failure is something that's very subjective. You might speak to somebody who got 75% on an exam, and they might think that that's an absolute disaster. And you might think, well, I would love to get 75%. That would be amazing for me. So it's about our own personal goals, and when we fall short of them. And typically, we tend to think of really high stakes failures. We think about things like job interviews, exams, driving tests, things like that.
Yeah.
And of course, those are really high stakes benchmarks in our lives and our careers. But little things can be seen as failures by people. Getting a question wrong in a public environment can be something that can be equally painful. And when I speak to groups of students, often it's the things that we might assume it is just small fry that actually can really embarrass them and hold them back from wanting to answer questions again, and can make people really reticent. The other thing about failure is it's not just about when things go wrong in terms of not achieving a goal. The prospect of failure can be so big that it can make people alter their goals in the first place, and that they might downgrade their goals as a result of thinking, well, I'll do something that I perceive as easier to avoid getting myself in a situation where I might feel out of my depth. Um, so failure can be really limiting, not just in terms of going back and trying to overcome past setbacks, but also it can stop us from really aiming as high as we might otherwise do.
And that, I think there's a few points there and deciding which one to go with first, I think. Because you mentioned failure as being subjective as well. And I think one thing I see particularly with professional exams is often people have come from a high achieving background. So, school exams, if they've gone on to further study at college, if they've done A levels, university, all of that good stuff. We're
Mhm.
always told aim for your highest. Like if it's not 100%, there's more you could get.
Mhm.
But then when we come to look at professional exams, you're aiming for that 50 or 55%. And it's a complete sort of shift. So I
Mhm.
wonder sort of how failure might come into that as well. If you're someone who's used to going, your example of 75%, oh my goodness, if I got that on my tax exam, I'd be dancing around. I'd probably be a prize winner.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is a difficult adjustment, and it is something that I think that as we move through the stages of our academic and then professional career, we do have to adjust to the fact that as things become more and more challenging, we might not stand out from the crowd as much. We might go from being, I don't know, primary school, the cleverest person in our primary school, then we go to secondary school and we're maybe in the top 10 percent in the year, and then we go to a prestigious university, and suddenly we realize we're surrounded by lots of really clever people like us. And then, as you say, if you move into professional exams that are really, really challenging, we might feel very average, we might feel mediocre. And that's really hard. And I suppose that the key challenge for this is, first of all, avoiding that comparison with others, that comparison with others from an academic and a professional perspective is really damaging. And we know that in life that comparing ourselves to others is not healthy. It's not good for our well-being. And that's really true from a kind of exam testing assessment perspective as well. So we really need to try to focus on, are we being the best possible versions of ourselves? Are we working on our own personal bests and trying to accept that in some situations, flawlessness, it's just impossible. And I suppose what we're talking about there is perfectionism. If we're always aiming for 100%, inevitably failure's going to strike at some point. These things are not easy. If they were easy, they wouldn't be worth striving for. And anything that's worth striving for brings with it the inherent prospect of failure. And we have to accept that. And that it's I'm not saying it's an easy thing to accept, but we have to do that. So the way that I speak to students about this is, we need to reframe moving away from perfection and aiming for excellence. And if the context of a tax exam is that 50% is excellence, well then that's something that I can live with. If that's something that is deemed as a really impressive benchmark, I need to say, okay, well, it's not going to be possible to get what I got previously. This is a different context, it's a different situation, and we have to come to terms with that. And I think that by doing that, you're giving yourself the chance to say, I'm not lowering my standards. I'm not going to suddenly say I'm happy with something that's sloppy and substandard. No, this is an aim, a benchmark of excellence that I'm aiming for. And if I can achieve that is fantastic, and I need to give myself a break on that.
That's really good. And I think a helpful way of, as you say, framing. Whereas you might have had these are often level 7 qualifications, so
Mhm.
equivalent to a master's degree, which certainly before I had an undergraduate, I'd never gone to that level before. So it's a new subject, it's a higher level potentially than you studied before as well. So there's a lot in that. Um, and I think, as you've helpfully said, that 50%, you have to do a lot to get that
Yeah.
50%. It's not I can do half the work. And I don't know if that might feed in as well a little bit. So again, for context, we often have about a 3 to 6 month run up for each exam. So starting from zero to being, exam ready in that time.
Yeah.
And I wonder if people sometimes think, I don't want to start it. I think maybe you hinted at it a little bit earlier, I know this is going to be hard. I know I need to start. How might that fit in with someone who appears to be, maybe procrastinating? Um,
Yeah.
could that be impacting on it? It's not just they're lazy and they don't want to do it.
No, absolutely not. Procrastination is a massive issue, not just for younger students at school. It's something that affects a lot of university students, and then, of course, it affects lots of professionals in their careers. And procrastination is something that we all need to guard against. And I think that prospect of something really intimidating, it tends to lead to two paths. Either people procrastinate, or they massively over prepare and burn themselves out by trying to do an unrealistic amount of work in a short schedule. So when it comes to procrastination, what's absolutely key is that when you're doing your studying, wherever you're doing your studying, it's absolutely vital that you create what the researchers call procrastination unfriendly environments. So procrastination friendly environments are environments where procrastination is easy to take place. It's much more likely to occur.
Yeah.
Whereas what I call a procrastination unfriendly environment is something where you're giving yourself the best possible opportunity to be able to meet deadlines, to focus, to avoid distractions, and so on. So one way to really do that is when you say 3 months, well, that seems like a massive amount of work in a short period of time. if we start to break it down into chunks, it becomes more manageable. And we think, okay, well, what are my priorities? What do I need to make sure that I'm going to work on first? People often work on things that they feel most comfortable, that they're already good at, and say, okay, well, let's be a bit brutal. Let's give ourselves some kind of confidence rating in different areas, different units, and say, okay, what are the bits that I really need to dedicate myself to begin with? In the kind of popular parlance, you call this eating the frog, getting over
Yeah.
the unpleasant stuff first of all. So that kind of thing, giving yourself realistic deadlines for these sub chunks so that you've got something to aim towards. You can kind of cross out certain areas as you complete them, and that gives you this sense of achievement as you move through them. Those kind of things mean that procrastination is less likely to occur over the long term as you gain confidence in areas that you previously struggled with. So that side of things is really vital. But if we're going to be really honest about the elephant in the room, things like technology and having those kind of digital distractions around you are what hold lots of people back. And if you're trying to do this really important, time sensitive work while you've got your phone at the side of you, or you've got your laptop open and you're constantly getting notifications from social media or work emails or whatever that may be, listening to music while you're doing all those kind of things just give you a much greater distraction and a much lower chance of being able to focus on the stuff that you need to focus on. So it's really dull and dry advice, but it's absolutely clear that put the phone in a different room. Having it on silent in your pocket, you're going to be thinking about it. You just have to be aware that the temptation to look at it is so great. These devices are designed to be distracting. If we don't put them away, we're going to fall into it. And I'm someone who knows all this research. And when I come to write my books and articles and so on, the phone has to be in a completely different room. Otherwise, I fall prey to it as well. So there's things like that can make a big difference to your ability to get the work done in that time pressure situation. I think also if we look at students who might be doing this after having been really successful at school and university and so on, sometimes when I look at how people are studying for exams, they do well or they've done well previously, despite the fact that their study techniques are not actually very good. So I think effective study techniques are really important as well. I'm assuming in these exams that there's a massive amount of technical content and information to know, lots of factual
Yeah.
knowledge, where you're having to define things and so on. So simple things such as using what we call retrieval practice, which is testing yourself using flashcards and things like that, is a really probably the most effective way to strengthen knowledge and long-term memory. So making sure that you're not just kind of reading over your notes and highlighting as you do so. Those techniques feel as if they're working. It gives you what we call this illusion of fluency, where you feel as if the words and the diagrams are magically jumping off the page into your brain. But actually, it doesn't work, and it's much more effective to try to recall this knowledge from without having your notes in front of you, doing it from memory, and it also allows you to see where the gaps are and where they aren't. So that going back to those effective study techniques are really important as well.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I love your summary of that, and it's something I always try and impress upon students as well. I know my knowledge of science of learning is enough to make me dangerous, I think. Um, but certainly, that it's that feeling of knowing when you're reading through, say, a case. I used to do it. You read through the case, and then you get to the end, you go, "Yeah, what was the point again?" Or
Yeah,
you go to try and answer a question. So yeah, I was 100% on the flashcards. I've seen students and tutors using spreadsheets.
yeah,
So they're trying to summarize it in their own words, okay, what was the point? What was the main principle that we got from that? How
yeah,
am I going to apply it? Or I like to say, if there was a really enthusiastic 3-year-old who was dying to know about tax, how
mm,
would you try and break it down? Because a lot of it is that,
yeah,
talking to clients,
yeah,
not quoting section numbers from legislation at them or things like
yeah,
that. So trying to keep it nice and practical, as you say, and particularly for these students, there often be that 3 to 6 month gap. but they'll be working full time as well.
Mhm.
They may have caring responsibilities of one sort or another. They may have holidays planned, goodness. Or there might be other events they have to work around. So I think the point you make about effective study techniques and feeling, well, sometimes you don't always feel in that session that you've got very far, but then when you recall it, you're like, yes, yes, I've
Yeah,
got that.
and I think when I said, look at things like if you give yourself a confidence rating, a mark out of 10, you might say, okay, well, I thought I was a 3 out of 10. Now I've done a couple of hours on this and I go back, look, and I'm a 7 out of 10 now, and I've not nailed it yet, but I'm making progress. And those things are really reassuring. You talked about also that those kind of things with social life and family life getting in the way as well. I think one really useful exercise to do is just to have a blank template of what your week looks like and try to identify crunch points within your week where you're not going to be able to do much studying. So where are you going to make up for that? Does it mean that because you go and do something on a Wednesday evening that you're going to have to do double on a Tuesday to make up for that time? And do you say, okay, well, I'm going to study um, for 6 hours on a Saturday during the daytime, and that means I can have the rest of the night off and things like that. And I just think having that basic like a plan that's a really basic outline. It can be revelatory. Sometimes I think that's really
Mm.
obvious, but sometimes when you sit down and you say, okay, that this is when I'm going to have to do the work because I can't do it then, it's something that's really useful, even if it's quite a basic approach.
Absolutely. And I think I'm definitely one of those people who will set a to-do list with about 20 things on going, yeah, I
Mhm.
can do that. But when you actually, as you say, look at, okay, how much time do I have? How long is it going to take me? Then you have to be a bit more realistic. Or sometimes you might think, I've got X, Y, Z on, it's going to take me forever. But actually, on a piece of paper, seeing it cold, hard, maybe you've got beautiful highlighters like me, you see the beautiful colors going on. You can actually see, oh, actually, no, there is some space there. So it can help, I think, maybe with some of that anxiety where you're perhaps thinking about it a lot and actually it's just kind of building up, building up. It's not actually a real threat in that sort of way.
Exactly that. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think there's some awesome techniques there in terms of thinking about, okay, how we can get studying to set ourselves up for success. So hopefully we
Mhm.
don't experience on results day the F word. Um,
Yeah.
but let's say, we've done our best.
Hmm.
We might have had that question, when you have 20 marks,
Hmm.
20% of your paper is on something horrendous. You try it, you do your best, but that, you know, means that you don't get your 50%. Maybe you're on 48, 49.
Hmm.
And particularly around those boundaries, we do get a lot of students who are 48, 49. So you're like almost there, but not quite.
Yeah.
So if you are receiving that sort of result, what are your tips or strategies for, if the next exam is in 3 months' time, how do you get
Mhm.
back to a sort of good point of studying to then have another attempt?
It's really difficult, isn't it? I can imagine when you're so close to the grade boundaries, and I speak to students about this all the time. And I was so close. If only this would have happened, and I totally understand that. It's really, really painful. I suppose that the first thing is just trying to put this setback into perspective and saying, okay, well, this is one effort that I've done at it. Things didn't go well that time. Does that mean that this is inevitable, that it's going to happen the same again next time? No, it doesn't. Do I have within my power the ability to change this outcome moving forward? And I suppose that's the first difficult conversation you have with yourself, where you say, can I do this? Am I going to kind of completely abandon all of my career goals because of one setback? No, I'm going to overcome this and try to put to one side those feelings of shame and embarrassment and all of that. It's something that's a really challenging exam. Lots of people will go through this stage. I'm in this situation. I didn't want to be in this situation, but I'm going to make the best of it moving forward. So I think that kind of having that talk with yourself and trying to put things into perspective is the first step. And I'm not saying that's easy. I would find that really difficult myself, and I really empathise with anyone in that situation. I think that the next thing that I would think about this upcoming exam, what the research tells us around test anxiety, and it's natural that if things have not gone well previously, that people would feel worried about what's coming forward, is that there's a big difference between stress and anxiety. And stress is this inevitable part of everyday life. We can't avoid in anything that's worth doing, anything that's challenging and purposeful. At some point, we're going to feel stress. So we're going to feel those kind of nerves. We're going to feel those worries and those kind of what if things go wrong. And what the research shows us is how we then respond to that stress will dictate whether it's going to become something that becomes manageable, that we can act on and we can overcome, or whether it's going to become anxiety inducing and it's going to stop us from being able to get where we are. And that's how we respond to these stresses. And if we can see it as a challenge rather than a threat, we're far more likely to overcome it. If we see stress of assessments as being something that's anxiety inducing, we're more likely to procrastinate, or we're more likely to find it difficult to concentrate on the work that we're trying to do. And that will tend to lead to these kind of self-sabotaging behaviors like procrastination and going blank in the exam and so on. Whereas if we can say, okay, things didn't go perfectly. I was really close actually, and that's not a lot, is it? We're talking tweaks, we're talking fine margins, and if I can look at the areas where things didn't go as well, that's a challenge for me to overcome. And this is where we can be a bit more methodical in looking at seeing exactly what it is that's holding us back. What are our strengths? What are the areas that are holding us back? And all too often, when people fail, they just say, "Oh, the whole thing was just a disaster. That was terrible. That's awful. I've made an absolute mess of that." And when we step back and look at it, actually, there's a few areas that have stopped you from getting that magical benchmark that's going to enable you to move on and then forget about the previous failures. So having a look at what areas are holding us back is really important. Um, the researchers call these exam wrappers, and exam wrappers are little reflective kind of self-questionnaires that we do after exams, whether they've gone well or not, to look at and think, okay, what did I do? What didn't do? What didn't go well? What didn't I do that was effective? What do I need to do next time to overcome that? And when I speak to younger students about this, they'll often be very honest and they'll say things like, well, I wish I'd have started revising earlier, or I wish I'd have focused on areas that I wasn't as strong as. I wish I'd have used these techniques that I know would give me a better chance of sticking it in long-term memory. I wish I would have worked on the questions that require application of knowledge rather than just sticking at the knowledge questions, and so on and so on. And I think that that's something that we can do ourselves. You know, what percentage of my time in the lead up to this exam did I spend on various things? What would I do differently? What am I going to do differently as a result of that? And the research shows that when people act in this way, that's really self-reflective, it gives them a much greater opportunity of making improvements on previous setbacks. So I think that's a really crucial part of the process. It would be easier to sink into despair and to waste the next month or so feeling as if I could never do that. I suppose that we need to try to, lick our wounds for a few days and then try to get back into that self-reflection stage so that then we can move forward.
And I think I really like that and that point in particular because it's, I think, very easy because I think some of this stuff we probably know inside ourselves as well. We
Mhm.
know that, if we're just going to sit and be miserable about it for 3 months, that's not going to be productive. But we need to need to feel the feeling a bit before we can then go, okay, right, take a breath.
Yeah.
And then because, logic isn't always there, when you're, right in there. And I think particularly, again, thinking about the context, often there is a very clear
Mhm.
exam route. And in your mind, you might have, I'm going to be qualified by
Mhm.
X date in 3 years, because often it is a 3 year period of study for lots of level sevens.
Yeah.
So in your head, you're like, this is when I'm going to qualify. I won't have to touch an exam again.
Yeah.
And I think, when you're moving that goalpost forward, back, that can be a bit of a hurdle, particularly if there's, apprenticeship blips.
Yeah,
You might have, timelines that you sort of need to adhere to as well.
yeah.
And I guess in that, in sort of taking that approach as well, are there things that, if you have a colleague who is not on the past list this time, are
Mhm.
there things that you can do to sort of help them through that process as well?
Yeah, I think that firstly, from a student point of view, it's about controlling the controllables, isn't it? And there's certain things that are completely out of your control. What's going to come up on the exam? What kind of timeline is going to be impacted by that? So I suppose again, it's trying to go back to what can I do about this rather than worrying about things. How is my manager going to respond to me having this setback? You can't really control that as much, can you? So just keep focus on what can I do to make sure I give myself the best possible chance of doing well in these exams. And just because something's gone badly once doesn't mean that you're not going to be really successful in your career. Lots of very, very successful people have had setbacks in certain areas. If I think of my own academic career, my own professional career, there's been jobs that I've applied for and not got and been devastated at the time and but overcome it in the long run. I've certainly failed exams and modules and stuff along the way. Um, and I consider that in the long run, looking back, it's probably helped me become a very driven, motivated person along the way. So I think that from a personal point of view, trying to say, okay, let's see this in the bigger picture. Does one setback mean that I'm not going to be able to do well at this career? Absolutely not. I just need to work on these certain areas. And I suppose that from a management point of view, from a leadership point of view, that those kind of conversations are really important as well. We could, as a manager, as a leader, we could heap pressure on these people and remind them, just to remind you that your future employment at this company is at stake here. That's terrible. That's just heaping pressure on people. We call those fear appeals, where we try to kind of scare people into working harder. You've got this coming up in the next week. If you don't do this, this is going to happen. We try to motivate people in that way sometimes, and it always backfires. So I suppose that reassurance is really important. That we say, listen, I know things didn't go well for you with the last one. We really still see that you've someone who's got a big role to play in this firm. We really believe in you, and we're absolutely confident that you're going to overcome that setback. We don't see a long-term problem here. If those kind of reassurances can be given, not necessarily giving loads and loads of guarantees about every single thing, but you're given a general sense everything's going to be okay. That's far more likely to get a positive outcome than anything that's going to be heaping pressure on. So yeah, I would urge managers and leaders to perhaps think back to when you've experienced those kind of failures. How did you feel after it? What kind of helped you? How did your supportive managers help you to come through the process? That thing, I think it's really helpful for everyone. And if it gets to the stage where someone decides, in the long run, I've had lots of goes at this, it's not for me, well, that's fine. But I think that these little setbacks, these blips, which feel like absolutely massive at the time, can often be small diversions on the trajectory towards a really successful career.
That's it. And I think it's interesting. So a point you made a little bit earlier, thank you for sharing that, you've had setbacks. I think we all have, haven't we? Let's be honest. I definitely have. The promotions that didn't quite happen.
Yeah.
We got there eventually, got there eventually. Um, but in terms of, you said that they had helped you to be motivated and driven.
Mhm.
What was it, do you think, if you don't mind me asking, sort of what was it that sent you down that trajectory rather than, as we've talked about before, that kind of this is never going to happen, or that sort of more negative um, outcome?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, it's not just something that comes from within. Having people around you and listening to people around you, friends, family, colleagues, offering you that reassurance and offering you that support and telling you things are going to be okay, is a really important part of that. And that's something that can really help you keep going and have that resilience along the way. But I suppose also just this sense that I do feel that I've got something to offer. I do feel that this is the right career for me, or that I've chosen the right subject to study, or whatever it may be. So I think it's just that sense of trying to look back and think, these are times when I've done something that's been really successful. These are things that have worked well. There's no reason why I can't do that again, and just trying to reassure yourself in that way as well.
I really like that as well, using the physical, is it physical? But the evidence that
Yeah.
you have got over hard stuff before. And sometimes when you really think about it, there have been some ridiculously hard things that you've done, and you look up from the other side and go, "Oh yeah, actually, I did do that."
Yeah.
Um, Studying multiple things at the same time, juggling, illnesses. There's so many things which can happen. Life does not stop just because we have an exam in the diary or we're planning to study.
Exactly
Um,
that. We often forget that we've overcome real adversity and real challenges, and sometimes it takes other people to point it out as well.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really nice point to almost finish on. There's one more question that I have, I
Mhm.
think. So just in terms of anybody, we've had advice of how you can put procrastination off and actually get studying,
Mhm.
get yourself in the best position possible so that you do pass. If you fail, some brilliant strategies, I think, of how, as a student, as someone supporting students, we can, ensure it is a blip on our journey rather than something which then defines what that journey is. I didn't know if there was one thing in particular that you would give to someone who perhaps is going through, let's say, tax exams, because they're my faves. So going through the tax exams, maybe there's been a blip and they are going, everyone else can do this. I feel like I'm a bit of an imposter. They're speaking this fancy tax language.
Mhm.
I don't know if this is for me. Maybe it's just you know, a blip, but how then the one piece of advice, if you had to narrow it down to one thing of all the things we sort of talked about, how they could sort of fail better in that context.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you look at the history of imposter syndrome, the two academics who came up with that idea, that concept, they did it based on their own experiences.
Okay.
And it was based on the fact that they were very high achieving, in their case, very high achieving females in a really competitive environment. And academia and the corporate world are two prime examples of that. And they fell out of their depth, and it's something that's really common. But the key idea there, to go back to it, it really impacts high achieving
Mm,
individuals. So it gives you this sense that you are going to be found out, that you're a fraud in some way, that you've been lucky so far. And I think I mentioned about thinking about successes, and people need to be methodical about that. If it's not something that comes naturally to you, if you struggle to embrace your successes and to acknowledge them, in the same way that people might, do like a gratitude journal or something like that, I'd say keep a success journal where you make a note down. These are three things that I did well this week, or even on a daily basis. These are three things that I was pleased with, that I made a positive contribution, that I achieved some task, that I overcome some kind of problem, that I made a suggestion that was considered useful, things like that. So you've got that evidence. You've got evidence. Actually, I'm not this person who's useless and out of my depth. I'm someone whose contribution. I think the other thing that I've really felt this as a teacher over the years is that I used to think that it was a real weakness to say I don't know the answer to that.
mm,
Whereas in this kind of really expert, high pressure corporate environment, I think the most confident people are the ones who say, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to need to have a little bit of a think about that one.
mm,
I will get back to you very soon." And that, I used to think you'd come across that people think, well, actually, they're out of the depth, they're a fraud, but that's the opposite. It's where you're saying, I'm not going to give you some answer just to try to look like I'm an expert, and it's probably going to be wrong. I'm probably going to regret saying it.
mm,
Where instead, I'm just going to think about it. And I think that shows that you're somebody who can be reflective, you can be thoughtful and considerate, but you can also be a really quick learner. And I think this is really good in those kind of environments where you might say, listen, I'm not particularly familiar with that at the moment, but I assure you I'm going to make myself familiar with it, and that will be an area that I'm going to, in a short period of time, be able to keep up with. And I think if you speak to bosses, colleagues, clients like that, people really respect you. And you don't have to be, deeply honest and say, "Oh, I've never heard of that." But you can say, "Okay, it's not something I'm that familiar with, but I will come back to you." And that's something that over time I've been much more confident to say, I'm gonna have to check that, and that's fine. That's great. So I would say that most people probably feel like it. But you have to, if you're struggling with it, you have to make it really clear. These are things that I've done well, and yeah, log those successes.
That's great, and thank you so much for that. I think it is particularly early on in career, as you know, you're being wheeled out, not literally, but
Mhm.
you're there as, you are a technical expert,
Mhm.
but something like accounting, something like tax is changing all the time as well.
Mhm.
So it's almost if someone says, I know all the answers, you kind of go, but do you?
You
There's so
do,
much.
yeah.
We had that announcement last week. It's all changed everything. And keep us on our toes. A new case comes out, a new bit of secondary legislation. All of a sudden, you have to get to grips with it. So I think the point you made about having that curiosity, being reflective, and learning is particularly important in a technical specialism that many of the people watching this will have, where it's just constantly changing. Like, I mean, I'm always in my books, always on HMRC's website, trying to keep up with it all.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, no,
absolutely. We need to be, to show that curiosity. We need to be lifelong learners as well. We need to model that, and that's again, that's confidence. It's not weakness.
yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. That has been so helpful and insightful to our students and employers alike listening. If there's anybody who'd like to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
You can contact me on LinkedIn. And if you were interested in taking a look at my book, it's available from Amazon. It's called Fail Better. So, yeah, take a look if there's anything else you'd like to dig into further.
No, that's great. And I haven't been paid, promise. I definitely recommend the book. There are lots of very practical activities in there. I think it's fair to say it's aimed at sort of teachers and education providers, but I think there is a lot that you can take away from it, even if you're not in the process of actually teaching someone.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, but if people want to get in touch and ask me any other questions via LinkedIn, that would be fine as well. I'd be very happy to dig a bit deeper.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. And thank you very much. If you've been watching this recording, we'll see you for VAT number 7 very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.